Welcome to Rates and Barrels. It's Thursday, August 11th. Derek Van Riper here with Eno Saris. On this episode, we'll discuss some recent pickups that we believe in, players that we think can make a difference down the stretch and possibly into 2023. We'll have some hitters, we'll have some pitchers as part of that group. Got a lot of good mailbag questions to get to, including one about the possibility of Juan Soto aiming for 2 mega contracts instead of just one. I think that's a pretty interesting kernel to put in the popcorn popper. What else do you do with a kernel, Pretty good thread to pull on.
There you go.
Not sure why I was thinking about corn, a little early for that, but had some questions also about why more leagues haven't shifted to Saves+Holds and the pros and cons of using salaries if you're going to set up a Dynasty league. So we begin with the recent pickups we believe in. Open question for you. We'll start with hitters. Are there any hitters you picked up in the last few weeks? It could be from this post-deadline fab run that we just had, or even from the last month or so, guys that you've picked up during the second half that you think are going to be very productive the rest of the way and possibly more impactful in the future than we previously expected.
Well, I kind of took this a different way, not necessarily the larger group of all pickups, but was thinking about kind of young players that have come into more time since the trade deadline or just recently. I think that one person that's really turning the corner right now, and I think, in keeper leagues and stuff, he's probably gone already, but in redrafts, Vinny Pascantino is, I think, turning the corner. I think we've been watching him and we like a lot of the process stuff, but now the results are starting to match the process. And it's a really interesting situation there in Kansas City because they have a group of young players now that are playing more than they used to be. And, we rag on them a little bit for their development of pitching, but when it comes to hitters, they're doing pretty good. I think the credit to Zumwalt and crew over there. So, when I made a leaderboard that we can share with people that I chatted to you. That's basically young players on bad teams that are playing a lot, sorted by plate appearances in the last week. And MJ Melendez is number 2 because he's now playing in left field.
Yeah.
And I faded him a little bit early on, just because I thought that, he was a catcher. Sal Perez is still there. I didn't think he didn't have a great minor league season this year, and I wasn't sure what the standout would be. I thought he would be kind of one of these catchers that strikes out, 27, 28% of the time, has good power. I thought he'd be like a 220 guy who could hit you 20 bombs as a catcher. I think he's showing a little bit more than that. I think the chase rate is not that bad. The contact rate is actually a little better than I thought, and the power has definitely come with him to the major leagues. And this added usage of having him play in left field is really interesting to me, especially for teams that are just looking for plate appearances, runs, RBI from anywhere. If you're in a 12-teamer and Melendez is still out there, you can add him and benefit from those runs and RBI. And then the last Royal that I thought was super interesting was Massey, who just came up. And they even have Prado playing. So they have Nick Prado, Michael Massey, Vinny Pascantino, and MJ Melendez playing very regularly. Massey is the guy that you want to pick up if you're chasing batting average and want to get lucky, because this is a guy who's going to make a lot of contact, put the ball in play. He's had really high BABIPs in his stops in the minor leagues. He sprays the ball around, and not necessarily one that's going to make a lot of contact or steal a bunch of bases. But if you're chasing batting average, there are worse places to go. So anyway, between that group, I think Pascantino is still my favorite. Prado looks like a low batting average slugger. Melendez is second, But Prado and Massey are playing a lot and have their own interesting aspects.
Yeah, I wonder if the Royals end up trading a young hitter for a young pitcher, given some of their pitching development issues. It certainly looks like they've got enough depth to possibly do that. And how they decide which of these guys they trade, I really don't know, because I think Melendez, the quality of the contact is really high. I think the adjustments he made, the lost 2020 season especially, makes the improved strikeout rate from high A to double A even more impressive. MJ Melendez struck out 39.4% of the time at high A. He was young for the level. He was a 20-year-old for, I think, most of that season. Got it down to 21.9% with the promotion to double A in 2021. And again, swing change unlocked even more power, 41 combined home runs between double A and triple A. Very age appropriate too, even a bit young for double A and triple A a season ago. So that's a big development win to get that much out of a player who at one point looked like he was going to just swing and miss too much to be more than a part-time player. So they deserve a lot of credit for that. But I think when you look at the barrel rates, the swing decisions that you mentioned, all of those things point in the right direction. Unfortunately, Melendez is a player I had to trade to try and make a run in one of my keeper leagues. And I don't think I'm going to win that league either. So it happens sometimes. The cost of trying to get better in a keeper league sometimes is that you give up young talent and you don't get the reward. You don't finish in the money. You don't win the league. And yeah, you can't be deterred by that. I mean, give yourself credit for having a prospect people wanted in the first place, even if you ended up trading that player away before getting to reap the benefits of what he can do.
Yeah, as you can tell from the through line on all those Royals, strikeout rate is such an interesting aspect of a young player's development, because as aging curves tell us, you're going to improve your strikeout rate until about 26, 27 years old. And, some of these guys come in. I remember Stanton coming in. Oh, he strikes out too much. He improved that strikeout rate, to his peak seasons, and some of his peak seasons were amazing. And it's still a thing that we look through. We just spoke on the last show about, good strikeout, good walk guys, and how they can pop in homers. It's a bias I have, but it's interesting to think about these breakout guys with high strikeout rates, because, we have Riley Green, JJ Bleday, Joe Adell, and O'Neal Cruz as guys on the other end of the spectrum, more Stantonian in that they have the potential for prodigious power, I think. They've shown it at different times in the minor leagues, and yet they also come with this price tag, this strikeout rate. And I wonder if there's one of that group that stands out for you. You can throw Nick Prado in there, really. But if there's one of those guys that stands out, or Jose Barrero striking out 56% of the time, it's early going. But
yeah, mind reader, because I just opened the Barrero Fangraphs page too. I saw him on that leaderboard, and I've wondered. He missed time with a wrist injury this year, so aside from the possible implications of not feeling 100% and the impact that could have on your bat speed, the swing and miss has been atrocious. So there's rust. There's a possible lingering injury. He is getting that chance right now. But
it was bad in the minor leagues too. It's not just the short sample in the major leagues.
Right. And we've talked about AAA last year being so diluted in terms of quality pitching that holding your own or having a good strikeout rate at AAA doesn't necessarily mean that you don't have a strikeout problem. 22% last season over about 200 plate appearances at that level. I guess that's what I'm clinging to. There's two things I'm clinging to. There was a good strikeout rate both at AA and AAA last year for Jose Barrero. And he's not just a power guy. He's also a speed guy. He was 16 for 20 as a base stealer last year. So even if, let's say he's a true talent 30% strikeout rate player in the big leagues, if he can walk a little, like we're talking 4 to 5% of the time, strike out about 30% of the time, but does damage and steal some bases, I think there's actually kind of an Adolis Garcia sort of a profile here. And I think players like that in the past have been blind spots for me, because I would look at them and get upset about the things they couldn't do instead of looking at them and saying, hey, as great as that red system is, Noel V. Marte and Edwin Arroyo and those young players that are coming, there's a whole year before they're probably going to start playing in Cincinnati. They're more 2024 than 2023. So Barrero might have this long runway for playing time next year. So I don't know if there's a whole lot Barrero can do to help you in these final 2 months of this season. It might just be too much swing and miss in the short term. It might be a 35 or 40% K rate while he figures it out because of all the injury issues and the rust. But I think if he does enough to at least give himself a chance to compete for a starting job next year, I could see myself being surprisingly interested in him as a bottom of the roster player in a great hitter's park who has a lot of ways of making value, even if that batting average is always lower than we'd like it to be.
Yeah, I see him as a pretty good draft and hold, like third shortstop type deal.
Yeah.
And that's a useful player to identify even now, because I think, there are deep enough dynasties where you might roster that guy just on your bench just in case he breaks out. And identifying draft and hold guys early just means that when you're drafting in January or December or whatever, you can put some Barreros on your squads in the back and maybe you profit for it. But O'Neill Cruz, I think is striking out more than I'd like, but for him, I don't see the same narrative in terms of it's a 1 year blip. What I see with O'Neill Cruz is just struggling with a new level. Like his strikeout rates have been consistently sort of 22 to 25 in the minor leagues. Some of his contact rates have been up and down, but those are I feel like they're measured differently. Like rookie ball strikeout rates, swing strike rates are always like crazy. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. I think they must include fouls or something. I don't know. Like it's like just a totally different thing. So I don't actually look at like low A rookie ball swinging strike that much. But since then he's been sort of 13 to 18. Right now he's on the sort of upper end of the swing strike rate. But really, I think he can get that strikeout rate below 30. And I think O'Neill Cruz is still my favorite in this group. I know that he's striking out a bit much right now. Sometimes it looks like some of it's something that he can't do anything about because he's so tall. He gets some bad calls low in the strike zone, a little bit like Judge, where because he's so tall, it looks like a strike, but it really isn't. Not for him. So, and he doesn't have necessarily top end restraint when it comes to chasing balls. But I see top end tools across the board, and I'm going to be in the tank for him again next year. I mean, 118 max EV. This guy can really wallop the ball, and I just think use that aging curve philosophy and say he's 23. He's got 3 more years of improving his strikeout rate. I think one of those years is going to be a top. I think he has first round upside. And I still think that to this day.
Yeah, and it might take a year or two for him to unlock all of it. But I think the thing with O'Neill Cruz is, he's got the big strike zone because he's so tall. He gets the pitches that other guys can't get to. It kind of works both ways. Like, there's maybe more space that a pitcher can try and exploit against him, but they can miss down, and O'Neill Cruz can hit a ball at his ankles really hard, which is a pretty odd thing to be able to do. I think we should look at an older player who got a new opportunity at the trade deadline. When we found out about the swap that sent Darren Ruff to the Mets and JD Davis with some prospects back with the Giants, that we both had the same sort of, hey, what are the Giants going to do with JD Davis? Because there's always been a pretty interesting hitter there, even with some flaws, right? A pretty good eye at the plate in terms of drawing walks, even though there's a little more swing and miss going back to last season than we would like to see. But before last season, JD Davis didn't strike out an alarming amount. He's usually in that low to mid 20% range, which is very acceptable for a player with that much power. We've already seen 3 homers in 7 games from him as a member of the Giants. So he had 4 in 66 games to start the season. I know there was an injury mixed in there as well. This is not the typical player that I'm trying to pick up in a keeper or dynasty league age-wise ordinarily. But I actually think JD Davis might be a good late season pickup for redraft leagues and a surprisingly good deep dynasty pickup as well.
Yeah, I think maybe a little bit more towards OBP leagues than batting average leagues. He's a little bit more of a risk there with that strikeout rate, but he still walks, he still hits for power. And, for me, the reason I made this list is I wanted to see who played the most over the last 7 days. You know, that was one of the things that I sorted for when I shared it with you in the first place. And Davis, you know, comes to the top a little bit when you do that. He's not necessarily the first or second, but you just look at usage, and Evan Longoria is healthy, you know, and JD Davis is a right-hander. And Evan Longoria has a club option next year for $16 million. I'm reading between the lines here. I think what they're doing is auditioning JD Davis to take over for Evan Longoria.
Yeah.
Because I think Evan Longoria can still be like a 2-win guy. And so theoretically, like sort of by the numbers, you know, 8 million per win is a decent number to spend. But it also is just spending the market rate on an older player that may not have any upside beyond that when you have a replacement player who will cost half as much, or actually about a quarter as much. So I really do think that JD Davis might be the starting third baseman for the Giants next year. So you put those things together, and all of a sudden he is a pretty good stash. And he reminds me a little bit of Luke Voit in Washington, where Voit had been kind of falling away from, you know, playing every day in San Diego and had been struggling. And I think just frankly was, you know, closer to being a part-time player than you expected going into the season, right? In the last week, the most played appearances in this group that we've been talking about went to Luis Rengifo in Anaheim, who we can talk about in a second. I know you like him a little bit. MJ Melendez second, Luke Voit third. 28 playing appearances in a week is full-time playing time. And he's cheap. The Nationals don't really have anybody else. It's one of the better parks he's played in. I mean, it's not New York, but you know, it's a pretty good park for power. I think Voigt's stock went up with that trade, and him and Davis are not quite this sort of young player that you would normally think about in these leagues, but I think they became way more playable, you know, in the last couple of weeks. And I still like them. You know, they're guys who hit the ball hard. You know, that's something we like here.
Yeah,
it's in the name.
It definitely is. I think part of my interest in Luis Rengifo, yeah, the Angels don't have a lot to push him right now. There's a power and speed combo. He's now 5 for 6 as a base stealer this year, so he's taken off a little bit. So you get that bottom of the roster speed. K rate's down at the lowest mark it's ever been at before. Mm-hmm. I think what we're seeing right now is the type of profile that you're very likely to get going forward. I'm a little surprised he's swinging as many pitches outside the zone as he has this season, but maybe
he has a pretty good hit tool if he's striking out this much and doing that, you know?
Yeah, this is kind of a slightly better than league average player that runs a little, and guys like that tend to be good players for us in fantasy. So I don't know if it's a high ceiling sort of thing, but he's exactly the kind of do a little bit of everything player who also has the doesn't walk, doesn't have that sabermetrically appealing slash line that gets people to be drawn to him. It's just kind of a decent accumulator that also offers some speed is probably the best summary I could put on Luis Rengifo right now.
And they never put him atop any one position on their depth chart, the Angels. And it's a little bit annoying, but he is a switch hitter. The name that I was thinking about a little bit was, I think Rengifo is a good AL only player next year because I thought of Chad Pinder, a guy who plays all over the field, who's obviously going to be important for his team. Chad Pinder is a righty, though. As a switch hitter, I think Rengifo just has more pathways to playing. And I know right now he's sort of, you know, playing third, and they're going to have a third baseman next year. And, you know, if they come into the season fully healthy, he's probably not their starting shortstop or second baseman. But they don't really have a starting shortstop, you know. And if they put Fletcher over at shortstop, then Rengifo could find his way to starting at second base. And even if he doesn't, he can play the outfield. He can play the infield. He's a switch hitter. So I think he's, I won't, I'm not, you know, another place where he is that draft and hold type idea.
Yep.
Because he'll probably be eligible at a few places. He'll probably play, and people might not be in love with him, but late in a draft, you might be able to pick him up and back up 2 or 3 different positions for you. So draft and hold, AL only. I'm in on it. And I think, watch him closely the rest of the season, because if that he hasn't really had a season other than maybe his rookie season where, he got a lot of plate appearances. And in that rookie season, his chase rate was much better. So, if you look at a seasonal graph by game of his reach rate, it took a real dive recently, and I wonder if that's just more playing time. And that's when he's had the best WOBA of the season too. So there's for him, I think there's just one more tweak that could unlock another level where he's definitively a starter. And that's, if he stops chasing stuff, I would think his barrel rate could go up to about 6%. And then you'd have a guy who might have a 7% walk rate, 17% strikeout rate, 160, 170. He'd be basically average everywhere with speed. I think he would basically find his way to a starting position.
Right. So even if he's not necessarily more than a late round pick outside of those draft and hold scenarios, he could still, if he's the starting second baseman, be good enough to play at least in 15-team mixed leagues. Rengifo has also started every single game since June 15th. Every single game. Second base is mostly where he plays, but as you said, they do move him around a bit. Rendon's going to come back healthy next year, hopefully stay healthy for a full season or close to it. But I think second base is really where you could see Rengifo fitting in.
And how many games is that?
Geez, I mean, we're talking 50 games probably now for that stretch. He started about 50 in a row.
Well, in the last sort of 30, his reach rate has really changed. So I don't know. I think there's something about that everyday playing time that just gets you more used to seeing pitches and seeing what teams are trying to do to you and trying to lay off that stuff. So, I mean, being atop the leaderboard for plate appearances in the last week among a bunch of guys who are really exciting is by itself, makes Voit, Davis, and Rengifo kind of interesting. Even if guys like Alec Thomas, Vinny Pascantino, MJ Melendez. How do you feel about JJ Bleday? We haven't talked about him much on this show.
Yeah, I look at JJ Bleday and I totally understand how the Marlins were the team that drafted him in that spot, fourth overall.
Strikeout rates.
Well, like I said, I didn't mean that to sound as mean as it does. I think he's going to be a good hitter. It's power over everything else. And I think given their park, especially, they need guys that hit for real power. It's a difficult place to hit. I think it's the problem I had with the pick, looking back on it, is that this is the type of profile that I always see as being easier to find in free agency. These are guys that frequently get non-tendered or traded in year 2 of arbitration, year 3 of arbitration. Teams never want to pay these guys $8, $10, $12, $15 million at their peak. They always want to just move on to the next one. And maybe Bleday has a higher ceiling than we're giving him credit for. But I see kind of a 25 homer, 240, 250, pretty good walk rate. It's a solid player. What's a 2, maybe a 3-win player most years. I don't know if defensively he's going to offer enough to add positive value there, but maybe he's good enough to not hurt you. He looks like a good, solid hitter, and a guy that, because he doesn't run a lot, or at least I don't expect him to run a lot, that we're going to just see him as kind of a highly replaceable fantasy player in most leagues as well. I mean, is there anything that you've seen so far that makes it seem like he's more than that?
Well, in real life terms, he's playing center field.
Yeah, I just don't know how long that's really going to last.
Yeah, it's interesting. He's already in -1 by outs above average. The other numbers like him, but it's an impossibly small sample. But and he's already started playing left field too. It's not like they installed him in center and said, this is our center fielder of the future. It's a little trepidation there as well. What I do like is a 10% or 11% swing strike rate and a 30% strikeout rate. I don't think actually are married correctly. So I think, Zip says he's going to strike out 24% of the time. And I think that's completely possible. Now, Steamer says 27. The Bat says 28. And I know where that comes from, too. I mean, he had a 27% strikeout rate in AAA. But I think a 24% strikeout rate is possible. Now, if you take that 24% strikeout rate and you give him his 207 ISO, now you're talking about a player that's harder to find, right? I mean, if we just do that this way, 200 ISO and a 24% strikeout rate. Who's a comp? Let me do a quick comp here. That would be Matt Olson, Seth Brown. I think
that's a
what you're talking about. They have similar ISOs and strikeout rates. But Seth Brown has a 7% walk rate. Matt Olson has 11% walk rate. I think Bleday is headed more towards the 11 than 7. But other names that also have similar defensive value, maybe Randy Arozarena is not really a good comp there. Randall Grichuk. Ooh, Randall Grichuk. Ooh, I don't like that. What is Bleday right-handed?
He's a lefty, so he's at least the big side platoon guy. I mean, I think the floor is big side platoon guy that pops homers. Like, that's not a bad player at all.
David Peralta.
More power, less average.
Yeah. Marcelo Zuna.
On the screen, recent pickups we believe in, and we're very skeptical of JJ Bleday.
No, I'm making the argument that I like him a little more than you, I think.
That's fine. You can have the JJ Bleday shares. I'll see how it goes. I'll sit that one out for 2023 and reevaluate at the end of next season.
Yeah, Ryan Mountcastle.
I've never been that into Mountcastle either, which might be a blind spot.
Yeah, it's an interesting grouping because if you go to higher strikeout rates, then you can get the higher power. It's kind of an interesting grouping there at 24 and 200. It's not an amazing group.
Well, another name that we'll get to probably at some point in an off-season episode too. We'll see what happens over the final 2 months with JJ Bleday too. I think that'll help really shape how much we like him or dislike him going in to 2023. We should talk about some pitchers because people ask about pitchers all the time in the mailbag. Reds4 sent us an email and wrote, I have a question for you regarding what to do in dynasty scenarios where you have a pitcher who has great stuff, pops in Eno's model, and has plenty of opportunity in front of him, but is stuck in an organization that doesn't seem like it's able to develop or properly utilize its pitching. Some personal examples that come to mind include Dylan Coleman in Kansas City, Chase Silseth for the Angels, and even to a lesser extent, Jansen Junk also with the Angels. All three pitchers have stuff that seems to pop in Eno's model and have had stretches this year where they've been successful, but their orgs just don't seem to be ones that can be trusted. So what do you do in this scenario? Do you hold if possible and bank on the front offices adopting new ways of thinking, or are you better off taking flyers on pitchers in more trustworthy organizations? So what do you think?
I think the big variable here that is true for almost everybody is in the offseason, they go somewhere else. And so in season, we might look hard at the Angels and say, what have they done for Jansen Junk lately? Or, are they screwing up Chase Silseth? But in the offseason, Chase is going to go somewhere else. And that's, I think, what's made it really difficult sometimes to study player development and to study player development outcomes are places like Driveline, but also P3 in St. Louis. And there's all sorts of places. And so I don't know where these people train. And even if they trained at, say, Driveline, having a list of all the pitchers that trained at Driveline would not give you the golden list of who's going to be great next year. And I think that's a lesson for the organizations is, pick players that you like. Don't pick organizations, I don't think. I know that the Rays seem to put their players in positions to succeed. There are people who have a different opinion of Rays player development and think that, I was just talking to a pitcher the other day who thought that they actively hinder their pitchers coming up in the minor leagues, and they're not good at player development. And I think that, I have a note in my notes column that I think is coming out tomorrow, which I think explains a little bit of the Rays situation almost more than anything. There's some research that says that after 80 pitches, your command starts to go away, and that command goes away in a start quicker than stuff. Stuff can stick around for 100 pitches, but command starts to fall away. Location values start to fall away after 80 pitches. And lo and behold, the Rays, bottom of the league in pitches per start at 75. They don't even get to 80. Corey Kluber has pretty, decent command. They don't let him go to 90. He's around 83, 85. So it's just that some organizations put their pitchers in a position to succeed, prepare them well, take them out early, that sort of deal. Don't let them see a third time through the order, that sort of deal. So some of that magic where you say, oh, the Rays are great at player development, some of that is picking the right players. They're really good at trading for players, I think. And then, not letting them embarrass themselves, basically taking them out early. So
right.
That, it's not always that they're amazing at developing the guys.
Scouting and managing the roster
might be their number one thing.
Those are not the same as player development. Player development is taking good stuff and making it great, taking average man and making it better. Like it's those types of things, right? I almost think they might be better on the player development side with bats. They're the ones getting more out of hitters' swings than other organizations. Rosarena, maybe to some lesser extent, Isaac Paredes. I know it's not looking as
Chang
good now.
is doing the same thing as Paredes. He's turning, burning on pitches up and in, and he's got more power with the Rays than he ever had before.
And then I wonder, it's like, so after they get you to make that adjustment and teams realize that's what you're doing, do you have another thing you can do when teams pitch you differently? That probably is the wide range of outcomes between players like Yu Chang and someone like Randy Arozarena. Arozarena is like everything working really well, even though we've talked about the flaws in his approach before. But yeah, it's easy to confuse those things. And you've talked about this before, where pitchers increasingly are realizing, I think this probably applies to hitters too, but they know that they have to take their career into their own hands. This is something that younger pitchers know as well as any group of pitchers that have ever been a part of the game, that in the offseason, investing in themselves, going to these facilities, doing the things that can actually make them better. I mean, that benefits them in the long run, right? The financial payoff of throwing harder, adding the right secondary pitches, being better does pay. So there's a huge incentive in this. And it's not fairy dust. It's definitely not fairy dust. It's not as simple as I showed up and I did the work and threw in front of the machine.
Now my slider's great.
Yeah, it's like, well, if you can't locate it, it's still not going to matter.
Yeah. And then there's the change within organizations. Sahadev Sharma has a really good piece about the changes within the Cubs organization in terms of pitching development. And, I don't think that we traditionally think of the Cubs as being a good player development system for pitchers. But now you can look at Keegan Thompson and, 10 for the year, 101 stuff, 98 location, 98.7 pitching plus is not the most exciting line you've ever read. But it is a guy with a bunch of pitches. The slider is coming on recently. He's throwing it more, and that has the potential to increase his stuff number. With a team that's getting more out of their pitchers, you look at Steele. That's I would say in the past, I would say, well, I don't know what the Cubs are looking at because my numbers don't look like theirs. And Steele, why is that doing that? That's weird.
Steele's been getting good results for the better
Steele,
part of the
95 stuff plus, 98 location, 97 stuff. Like, yeah. So one thing I would say is if you are looking for stashes and you are using the model to identify them, I was thinking about this with Sears going to Oakland. Like the A's said, stuff is too expensive on the open market. So we're going to get guys who don't have great stuff, but have a bunch of pitches. And that's something I've said on this podcast is like, if you're looking for someone to pop, it might not always be the guy that has great stuff in small sample, like Luis Heel always had great stuff in small samples. He's a fastball slider guy. He's maxed out in a way, right? What more can he do other than maybe go 4 or 5, be like a Glasnowian type if he's like at the very top of end of it, or just be a reliever. I mean, Spencer Strider is like the very best outcome you can have for a high stuff guy that has 2 pitches, right? Like he's just so great at both of those 2 pitches. He's a glass now, you know. But those things are harder to find. So if you instead look, you know, around average stuff, and you look at a guy like Bailey Falter, you know, 98 stuff, 105 location. He has a lot of pitches, and there's some evidence that he's not throwing necessarily the best mix that he could throw. That's a guy, and the Phillies aren't known as a great pitching development organization necessarily. People don't put them on the list, but Falter is a guy. Chase, I think, Silta is an interesting guy. 98 stuff, 98 location, definitely 3 pitches. You know, so you know, Glenn Otto, 98 stuff. More than a Brad Keller, who's in 98 stuff, but is kind of definitively a 2-pitch guy by now. So I would look for multiple pitches and also remember that 98 stuff plus is about average for a starting pitcher. It seems like it's below average, but that includes all the relievers. So you're still shopping at an okay, like Tucker Davidson, 97 stuff plus, 97 location, definitively 3 pitches at least. New organization, new lease on life. I think that's a stash, you know, even if he struggles the first time out. So that's something I would look for beyond just the high stuff guys, because the high stuff guys, like, is there a high stuff guy that's under owned that nobody knows about anymore? Nick Lodolo, Roansy Contreras, Aaron Ashby, like. You're not going to surprise anybody with that. You're not going to like, oh, just throw a little Aaron Ashby in this deal. Like, oh, I'm just going to go pick up Aaron Ashby off the wire.
Probably not in most leagues. Maybe shallow leagues, these available. But yeah, in a typical league, the person that has Ashby believes in Ashby. I'd love to know why we haven't seen Roansy Contreras back in the big leagues. I thought the demotion for him at the All-Star break was just roster management. Let's get an extra reliever up. We're going to manipulate the schedule. We're going to bring him back up. He's pitching in the minors. They're kind of easing him back into a full starter's workload. He came back on July 26th, went 2 innings, went 3 the next start, and went 4 the next. So they're really being careful with him. But you could do that in the big leagues. Let him do it again. How much does it really hurt your big league team to let him do that in the big leagues? That's always the thing that confuses me. But I think the JP Sears example is a good one, because I think when you're talking about players who were sort of blocked on their old team, even if they're going to an organization that doesn't have as strong of a reputation for player development, he spent years in that system where they have the player development. He's got good results in the minor leagues, and now he's in a pitcher-friendly spot with job security. So the organization doesn't matter as much to me from a what can the organization do perspective as it matters from the what kind of opportunity does this guy have. JP Sears could be another Nestor Cortez
Cole Irvin even.
Or Cole Irvin, right? Like those guys come through, they deliver great ratios, and then we're skeptical some more because they never really popped as great prospects, and it turns out they end up being valuable for a few years. I think John Means at first when he broke in was like that for me. No one wanted John Means. I was in a 20-team Dynasty league when John Means broke through. I think I picked him up for $1, and he ended up being an easy keeper. And some of this is just opportunity. Who's going to have an opportunity to have that more prominent role? And I think with Silseth, I can see it for next year. With Dylan Coleman, I have a harder time seeing it, because Dylan Coleman to me, I thought was just a simple, like, good short reliever. And Barlow's pitched well enough where I have a harder time talking myself into wanting to hold Dylan Coleman right now than I do Sears and Silseth and a lot of the other names that people have thrown out there.
One thing I have done on my own documents for Pitching Plus is add another column that is pitches per appearance. And I think that's a little bit more of a fine.
It's not a kernel.
It's a kernel. It's more of a fine tool than just games started or games not started. You know what I mean? Like there are people who are in relief that are throwing more pitches than other pitchers who are in relief, right? So in order to kind of sort this for this, I just did everybody over 50 pitches per appearance, and that way you get a sense of who has some length. But there is something interesting that happens between 50 and 45, and 40, where you do get some of these pitchers that are in between. Paulo Espino for the year has 40 pitches per appearance. But we know that's been trending towards starting. Alec Mills is in this group where he's in between. And he still has that excellent command, and he still pops as someone who is above average by pitching plus with really bad command. I don't know. There's some other pitchers here that look kind of interesting, like Corey Abbott, and even Luis Patino still. So Andre Palante, not interesting, but in this range.
It's funny. I think Patino has a strong case to become the next Jose Urquidy on this podcast. Like if Urquidy graduates and becomes a good pitcher we thought he could be for the last 3 years, Luis Patino is the new chair of that committee. The pitcher we really like, who should be good but hasn't had a chance to do it over a long period of time, or had the chance and didn't do it for some reason, and we don't know why. Much like the Derek Zoolander School for kids who don't read very good but want to learn how to do other things good too. I think that's the school.
Urquidy is really interesting though, because he's had a stretch of pitching at home, and he has a large split between his stuff plus at home versus on the road. It's 115 at home and 105 on the road. Luis Garcia is like 105 at home and 95 on the road, and everybody else on the Astros is fine. So it's not a team-wide thing. I'm not suggesting they're cheating. Somebody thought I was tweeting about that because they're cheating. I have asked the modeler to give me home road splits for everybody, for the league, so I can kind of go into this deeper. But it is interesting that Urquidy's good stretch recently has been mostly home starts. So I would be more careful with Urquidy and Luis Garcia at home and away than I would somebody else that just had weird home road splits but didn't have weird home road stuff splits. You know what I mean? There's something. Why would his stuff be different on the home versus the road? I guess comfort is some level. There is a dome aspect to this. Domes foster more vertical movement, it looks like. Chris Langen from Driveline did a little bit of poking at that. So maybe you can trust Urquidy and Garcia more in domes than out in the wild. But that's something I want to poke at a little bit further. And if anybody wants to, on the Google Doc, I did put stuff plus and pitching plus by appearance. I didn't say if it's home or away. So you'd have to do some extra math. Sorry about that. But any aspiring Sabrists out there that want to do that work, have at it. I think there's something there for home road splits and looking at what happens to stuff in different locations.
Let's get to a few mailbag questions. We'll go rapid fire on these. Could Juan Soto, given his age, he'll be 24 in October, actually consider going for 2 mega deals? Tony sent us this email suggesting that maybe he gets an extension for 7 years and $300 million. And then once that contract is over, he goes back onto the market as an early 30-year-old that could, because of the money being different at that time, maybe get another 7+ year deal for $350 or more. Do you think it's possible, or do you think Soto's aiming for just the one giant contract?
There's a lot of different reasons for this comp for me. Miguel Cabrera and Juan Soto are comped by their opposite field approach, by their power, by some of their early numbers, by their early starts. And so I wanted to look at his deal I'm not seeing it, but didn't he signed a big deal with the Tigers when he got there? And then he signed a big extension. So he had an 8-year, $248 million. That's what he's on right now.
That was the extension.
He signed that at 33.
Yeah.
So I think Miguel Cabrera is the problem. The only problem with using Miguel Cabrera as the model for Juan Soto is Miguel Cabrera. I just mean like
there's a big difference.
Like I just mean like how it's ending. You know, I think a lot of people look at Pujols how it ended and Cabrera how it ended and be like, I just don't want to be the Tigers on the hook for what have they been paying him? They've been paying him $30 million a year, and they've been getting replacement level.
Sure,
yeah, replacement level for 5 years, 6 years. So like that was not a good contract. By the numbers, by WAR, by all that. He can go for it, but I don't know that necessarily the market will give it to him.
I think more likely he'd want an opt-out around age 29, 30, 31. And then if things are going really well, he can read the market, opt out, and either get more years from his current team or go to free agency a second time. That to me seems like the deal that Soto and his agent would want.
I mean, he definitely wants the high AV. Like that was one of the reasons he was rejecting the deals that the Nationals offered.
Right. And that leaves the door open for a shorter deal. But I think the opt-outs, I get security, but I also have the option if I want to go out and test the market again. And I think a team might be willing to do that because that might be the difference in getting him versus not getting him.
Especially a team like the Dodgers.
Yes.
They love higher AAV, shorter contracts. They would love to do that.
Got a question here from Dave. Dave wants to know, why hasn't there been a shift away from saves and towards saves plus holds leagues? I think this has come up occasionally during draft season. I don't play in any saves plus holds leagues. I didn't like holds initially because I felt like it was another garbage stat. And as I once said on Under the Radar, a garbage stat, saves plus another garbage stat just means more garbage. The truth is, like, it does actually balance things out. I've looked at some leagues more recently that play this way. You get you get a better distribution within the category. And it softens some of the issues that we talked about on the last episode, where you have this hyper-inflated closer pool that kind of, I don't know, it puts an unnecessary strain on the decision-making process to try and chase those players early or to play the waiting game. So saves plus holds definitely helps eliminate that.
I've got a couple leagues where I play with it. Usually I play with saves and holds. And what that does is it does something very similar, but it's not exactly the same, because saves and holds just means that there's a wider market of players that everyone's interested in. You know, people are interested in setup men. That helps. Saves plus holds, I think you still actually want to have a high-end closer as your number one, because saves in terms of who teams give saves to over the season, they give it to fewer pitchers. They will give saves to 2 pitchers largely over the season, or maybe 3. But holds, they'll give a lot of holds to 2 or 3 pitchers for a little bit of time, and then they'll switch, and it'll be a whole new 2 or 3 pitchers. You just think about guys who pitched the 7th and 8th for good teams all this year, and they go up, they go down, they go away, they get hurt. Jonathan Loaizaga, Chad Green, like just think about the Yankees, who've been amazing. They've cycled through a lot of different players in the hold spot. And I would have said to begin the season, a guy I can really bet on for holds, Chad Green, baby. Love Chad Green. I buy Chad Green in all my holds leagues. I did get Michael King, and then he got hurt. So I just feel like the holds part comes and goes. Even holds are like a lesser saves. They're even worse because
they're worse. They shouldn't be their own category. That's the change I don't want. I'm fine with them as a combined category now, and I didn't used to be. I do not want holds as a 6th pitching category because it's awful standalone.
It's pretty bad. And what I end up doing, like I have one league where I have 6 SP slots and 6 RP slots. 6 RP slots.
It's a lot.
6. And we have saves and we have holds as separate categories. I end up trying to fill my RP slots mostly with closers. And then I do a lot of SP eligible guys, because that actually is where you can get holds. And, John Duran, Tanner Houck, a lot of these guys that were starting pitchers before filter through the back end of the bullpen towards the ninth inning, right? And so you can get holds, Griffin Jacks. There's a lot of guys that and Pitching Plus can help you really identify them. Generally, Pitching Plus is really solid with relievers. And if you are in a Saves and Holds league, I would be looking at that as a destination for who's a good reliever and who's going to pitch a lot in high leverage. So I think generally, I don't mind it though. It's just another rule. I can win. I figure out how to win.
People are slow to change. That's why it's not happening in more leagues. I'm guilty of this. Sometimes I go kicking and screaming on things like that. I shouldn't really care quite that much. I think
you're right though. That holds are kind of garbage. I mean, it's like saves, but even worse.
But I think adding them to saves at least opens up that pool of players a little bit more, and then you get to the point where the most high leverage relievers on the best teams end up getting rewarded a bit better that way. It's a slight improvement, I think, and I didn't think I'd be at that
players
point
in the
before.
pool is better. I mean, I like that. I like that there's a place. I mean, there's a lot of like Michael King should have been owned.
Yeah. That's great players should be rostered.
Yeah.
That's the way fantasy should work. We'll have more questions on pretty much all the episodes for the rest of the season. It's that time of year where the mailbag opens up a lot. We try to help people out. We'll have more Dynasty and Keeper questions, but anything that you want to send our way, you can send to us via email, ratesandbarrels@theathletic.com. On Twitter, you can find Eno at EnoSaris. You can find me at Derek Van Riper. You can also leave questions under this video on YouTube as well. Be sure to hit the like button and subscribe to our YouTube channel if you haven't done so already. Also, if you're enjoying this podcast on a platform that allows you to rate and review it, we really appreciate that. If you could take a moment to do that. If you don't have a subscription to The Athletic, get one for $1 a month for the first 6 months at theathletic.com/ratesandbarrels. That deal might not be there forever, so take advantage of that while you can. That's going to do it for this episode of Rates and Barrels. We are back with you on Monday.
Thanks for listening.